For almost 50 years, the world was basically split in two, with everyone holding their breath, caught in this super tense standoff between two global giants. And then, in what felt like the blink of an eye, one of them just disappeared from the map. So how on earth does that happen? How does a whole empire just collapse? And what comes next? Let's dive in and unpack how this massive shift completely remade our world.
You really can't overstate how huge this was. For 45 years, pretty much everything, from the race to the moon to Olympic hockey games, was basically a stand-in for this big fight between two completely opposite ways of life. The world had a line drawn right down the middle. And then, almost overnight, that whole reality was just gone.
And that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, how could a superpower that seems so invincible, a whole network of nations with this massive military, just fall apart? Well, the truth is, it wasn't just one thing. It was this powerful mix of different forces all hitting a crazy boiling point at the exact same time.
Okay, so let's break down how this collapse actually worked. Think of it like a building with a really bad foundation. Cracks started to form because of all this incredible pressure, both from the outside world and, maybe even more importantly, from the people who were living inside.
The whole Soviet system was really caught in a trap. From the outside, you had the United States pushing hard with economic and military pressure, dragging them into an arms race that they just couldn't afford anymore. But the real knockout punch, the thing that would literally bring down walls, came from inside, from millions of regular people who were just done trading their freedom for a broken system. And that pressure from within, that was the true catalyst. For decades, speaking out meant you'd get crushed. But by the late 1980s, the system was just too weak, too broke to fight back. The desire for democracy and freedom became this unstoppable force flooding the streets all across Eastern Europe. And that huge wave of popular protest finally broke in one very specific place, creating an image that would forever define the end of an era, the fall of the Berlin Wall. This was so much more than just knocking down a concrete barrier. This was about shattering an entire ideology. I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you how unbelievably fast everything happened at the end. The pressure was building up all through the 80s, but once those demonstrations really exploded in 1989, it was like a dam breaking. The wall coming down in November wasn't really the cause of the collapse, it was the signal that the collapse was already happening and couldn't be stopped. After that, history just went into overdrive. In just a couple of years, a whole world order was gone.
You know, this is a perfect textbook example of the domino effect. Once the Berlin Wall was breached and everyone saw that the Soviet Union wasn't going to send in the tanks to prop up these old governments, it was game over. One communist regime after another just toppled in this incredibly rapid chain reaction.
But those dominoes didn't just stop at the Soviet border. The fall of all those countries in Eastern Europe was really just the warm-up act for the main event, the complete dissolution of the Soviet Union itself.
So you can see this clear, logical sequence of events. First, you have all that pressure from inside and out, weakening the whole system. The fall of the wall was the first giant crack that everyone could see. Then, the outer layers, all those satellite states, just crumbled away. And finally, the very core of the structure, the Soviet Union, couldn't even hold itself together, and it just disintegrated.
And just like that, the U.S.S.R. was gone. It didn't just change or reform, it shattered. One enormous country broke apart into 15 separate independent nations. It literally redrew the map of Europe and Asia.
And out of the wreckage of that old empire, a totally new chapter began. For the first time in decades, or for some, the first time ever, these countries were completely independent. And their new path was pretty clear. They turned their backs on the old Soviet model to build new societies with democratic governments and free market economies.
You know, an empire that big doesn't just disappear without sending shockwaves everywhere. So what did the world actually look like the day after the Cold War finally ended?
Well, the single biggest result was this massive collective sigh of relief that you could feel all around the globe. For 45 years, everyone had lived with a terrifying possibility of nuclear war. Suddenly, that constant grinding tension between Washington and Moscow was just dialed way, way down. The main conflict that had defined global politics for 2 generations was over.
In this brand new world, America's role had to change too. The old policy of containment, of stopping communism, was replaced with a policy of assistance. The U.S. actually started providing support to many of these newly free countries,
helping them get through the really tough transition to a market economy, and helping them build the kinds of democratic institutions they'd never been allowed to have.
So when you look back, the collapse of the Soviet Union was this huge, world-changing event, pushed by pressure from the outside and an unstoppable demand for freedom from the inside. An empire vanished and new nations were born. But that leaves us with the big question, one they're still working on today. After so many decades under that kind of rule, what kind of incredible challenges would these new countries face trying to build a stable, prosperous future from scratch?